Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to Designing a Value-Aligned Network with Jill Marini. My name is Colin Mahan, and I'm a program manager at the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. And for those of you who may not know and joining us for the first time, the NASDAQ Center is a nonprofit dedicated to enabling entrepreneurs from all over the world to realize their maximum potentials and grow. As you may have just seen in the chat, the NASDAQ Center, along with our partner Mentor Cloud, launched a free mentor matching platform for entrepreneurs called Mentor Makers. You can create your own advisory board to guide and inspire you with in-the-moment mentorship from topic experts and professionals dedicated to providing exceptional mentorship to entrepreneurs across all races, industries, and more importantly, geographies. So find or become a mentor today by using the link in the chat. As we know, mentorship matters to all entrepreneurs. Their success is dependent on it. We're going to open up for live Q&A at the end of the event, so please submit your questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen throughout the presentation. We'll try to get to them all. Now, none of what we do here could be possible without all the amazing support from our sponsors, including NASDAQ, Lehigh University, Bank of the West, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, Woodrow Sawyer, BPM, and NZTE. We're humbled by their contributions. Now, during these still somewhat unique times, we're curious to learn how sentiment is among the entrepreneurs that we work with. So we're going to start by taking a couple polls. The first one, how are you feeling? We've been measuring this since the beginning of COVID. So we're just seeing how you guys are all doing out there in the ecosystem of entrepreneurship. The second question, what's keeping you up at night? Those are topics that we will hope to serve in the coming months to address the challenges and hurdles that you all are facing out there in Zoom land. So I'm going to give this just another 30 seconds or so because I want to jump into the content. So much to cover today, but it looks like optimism is at the top of our sentiment, and also finance is at the top of what's keeping you all up at night. And so good thing that our topic today is going to cover some of those financial challenges and hurdles. So I'm going to stop sharing that. Now, without any further delay, please join me in giving a warm welcome to our special guest in the chat, Jill Marini. She's the CEO and founder of Mother Superior. Jill, welcome.
Hey, hi.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm just going to dive right in because we've got so much great stuff to cover.
Let's do it.
Awesome. Well, just like any entrepreneur, your journey is truly unique. Can you talk a little bit about what drew you to entrepreneurship in general and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, I think when I think about my career, I think about it as something that has been this constant journey that has put me in, or where I put myself in places between traveling back and forth, between creating things for other people and creating things for myself. And so I've done pretty much anything across the board. Started as an Air Force grad, transitioned into corporate for a couple of years. And then I like to say that I overcorrected. I became so overwhelmed that I started studying movement therapy and went to a yurt in Germany for a while. And ended up owning some restaurants and studying local food systems. And then I found myself in San Francisco at the MBA program at California College of the Arts. And for me, this was really transformative and really incredible because the program focused on this really central idea that everything about the way we look at business is by design. It was designed by someone, whether that be our financial system or our social system or our systems of money or the way our political system. And because someone designed it, right, it can be redesigned. And so I think previous to that moment, I wasn't exactly sure how I fit. Maybe I thought that I was just sort of destined to this life of like oscillation. But I think that made me realize that everything that I have done was really about challenging the status quo and helping people be really well, right? Socially well, physically well, emotionally well, and equitable. And so I think at that point, right, that was sort of really the genesis from where I was to really where I am today and how I understand the work that I'm doing.
Awesome. And speaking of design challenges and reimagining industries, you saw a gap in the current VC model. So, which is the reason why you started Mother Superior. So, what's this gap? I'm sure many of our entrepreneurs know it. And how are you solving it?
So I think in 2017, when I really started working on Mother Superior, we were also like really starting to get a buzz in a meaningful way about the funding gap, right? And at this point, I'm assuming like everybody in sort of this chat, like we know the stats, right? Like we know how bad they are, and we know that they have essentially the way that VC is designed is kind of the reason for why we are where we are. But I think the thing that struck me was that we were all talking about the money. And the money is really critical, right? Like so important, it has to be there. But it is also an incomplete solution to bridging that gap. And I think that was really clear to me because I am also in this category, right, of historically excluded founders. And even with money, the systems and structures that exist in the space weren't designed for my success. They weren't designed for people in my community, and they weren't designed for people that are sort of on the short end of those statistics. And so the other thing that I noticed is that the money in itself didn't solve the problem of also reflecting the type of business that I think would get us where we wanted to go, right? What kind of businesses do we need to see in the world? And so as long as the way that I started thinking about it was, as long as the way that we raise and structure these funds, and as long as founders are evaluated by the same criteria and sent on the same VC journey with the same goals, our like worthiness, right, for these opportunities depended on us to be able to show up in a certain way as a certain type of founder, willing to take certain terms and willing to grow our businesses in this very certain way. And that didn't make sense. So Mother Superior for me was this critical opportunity to take sort of what I was talking about before, right? This realization that VC is like everything else, right? Is by design. And it wasn't designed by someone that looks like me or, looks like, someone that looks like the people that are getting, 0.2% of funding right now. And so we had this really cool opportunity to design these modern models that bring the same support and opportunities to the people with brilliant ideas and incredible work ethics that really represent this new generation of founders that I want to see in the world, right? Like the ones that are out there looking to build products and services that make the world better, that are building authentic wealth, that are building socioeconomic agency for themselves and their families and their teams and communities, like right along the way, like right in step with profit.
I love that philosophy so much. And speaking of opportunity, as the numbers have been coming out, there's a lot of VC capital being deployed in the market right now. So what's the upside, more importantly, downside of so much money being invested?
So I think, we all know, right? You get money, you can go fast. And you can attract a great team. And I think, for many of our industries, right, there is this sense of urgency. Like I have to do this and I have to do it as fast as possible and take as much capital as possible and run, right? Because if I don't, someone else will. And I think especially, at least it's something that I feel and the founders that I work with feel that because we have to fight so hard to get the same dollars, that there is like that extra sense, right, of urgency for us. I also think that there's status attached to capital, right? For better or worse, when you raise money, you are in the club. And that, again, right, as you are going out and as you're doing a lot of these other things we're talking about today, like building network and finding mentors, right, and really sort of connecting with that VC community, that matters because people want to know, like, who led you around? I think the other really great thing about raising capital, and this is something that I work on all the time, is getting really good at telling our stories, right? We get so close to the work that we often want to tell everyone everything, and we forget that it is just as much of what we don't say as what we are saying. And really understanding how to tell that story and how to sell our business to each person that we encounter, because that story is a little bit different, right? Every time. I think maybe the last pros, with so much money being out there right now, especially for some early stage founders, I think there is this opportunity, and I don't quite yet understand if it's balanced or not, but we have a little bit more opportunity to really vet who we're partnering with. And I think when there's more money to be had, we have more choice. And so I think that, maybe right now, like that's a really interesting space that a lot of us maybe in this room haven't had a chance to play with before or really consider.
I love that. And the potential downside?
The potential downside, gosh, it is so distracting, right? Like if we're raising money, we are not working on our business. And I think that is a constant struggle for me. It's like, what am I spending my time doing today? And I will tell you that I just got sucked into an 8-week black hole. I mean, I think there's a question later that will kind of, we'll talk about this, but I am currently raising right now for something, right? And it was this really exhaustive process where I had to really understand like where I was spending my time because I had to get ready for that raise. I think a con and sort of related to a pro, but the flip side of this, right? We fetishize our raises. How much? How much did you get? Right? And it is like a badge of honor. Like if you raise $6 million in a seed round, like you must be amazing, right? But that's not really true. And I think we have to be really thoughtful about when there is more opportunity, we want to jump on that. Of course we do, right? Because we might not find it again. But are you raising what you need? Are you raising only what you need? Are you being ultra conservative about your overhead, right? Are you using that money to hire the most talented and experienced people you possibly can? That can get the job done exceptionally and on time. Are you avoiding redundancies in hiring? When I think maybe the last con I just want to highlight, and I'm sure that we know this, but I think for me, I sometimes need to remind myself of this, even being in it all the time, is that when you commit to that money, you are committing to an exit of some sort. And you're also committing to a certain trajectory for your business. And it's really important that you understand what that is and making sure that that is in line with the values and your vision, because that money, right, is really sort of shaping the next year, 5 years of your work.
It's super important to highlight because, return is in the model itself. You mentioned storytelling and attracting talent. And many investors prefer to deploy capital to founders who have co-founders. Mm-hmm. So can you speak a little bit about some of your advice to how to find co-founders and even in these times?
I think that your co-founder is the most important decision that you will make, right? I think that we see so many times like the success or, the failure of a business oftentimes really lands on, who you brought into that circle or, who decided sort of to come together in those very initial stages. And I say often that, your domestic partnership and your business partnership require the same skills, but it's a lot easier to exit your domestic partnership than it is your business partnership in many ways. And because every other decision is dependent on this one, and because we typically enter this in the early stage, I think it's really important for us to understand that there is so much that we don't know, in those moments. And we always want to go in with all of the optimism, right? And we want to believe that this is going to work. And we really, truly want to believe that this person is going to be the co-founder we need. And because we really don't really have any context, right, to navigate and evaluate these partnerships and like very well-defined visions, it is just as much of a dating process as anything else, right? What are your strengths? What are your working styles? What are your values? Are your long-term goals aligned? Do you want the same thing out of this business? And oftentimes you don't think to ask that. And then you find out that, someone wants to hold it for 10 years and somebody wants to, turn it around in, in 4, and that's a big conflict. But I even think more tactically, you must make sure that you are diversified and strong in your talents, and that you innately trust this person to be reliable and to step up into the hard times. Because founding is a lonely business. And, like every meme in the world, right, talks about like, how hard it is to be a co-founder, but they exist for a reason, right? Like it's rough, and you basically, live or die, right, by your choices. And so we really do need our co-founders to be as resourceful as we are, and as proactive and as strong as we are, mentally, emotionally, right, really driven toward that goal. Thinking about how they handle conflict, right? And then just gut check, do you like them? Like, do you want to see their face every day? Right. And so really treat it as the most important initial decision that you're going to make, and go to the places that you think will never possibly happen.
Sound advice. And yeah, I love the comparison to being a marriage, because the good days and the bad are spent with your co-founder.
That's it.
So speaking of, I guess, personality traits, what are some of the things, as you are designing a new way of looking at entrepreneurs, like in many ways, what are some of the things you look at in an early stage entrepreneurs outside of their financials?
I think I partner with founders in the very earliest stages. And so, at that point, your financials, your valuations, right? At this point, it's anybody's best guess. And so we can calculate, and we have our spreadsheets, right? And we look at the numbers to the best of our ability. But I think so much of what I do, Mother Superior's thesis is a founder first thesis. We call them everyday founders, right? They are the people that are historically excluded from venture opportunities, right? They are women, they are queer, they are people of color, they are mothers, they are disabled, right? They are the people that really are, have been excluded from those opportunities. And what I have found, and what I just adore so much about every founder that we have worked with, is that they show up, and they show up with tenacity. They show up with purpose, right? They are creative. Like, they are finding these really interesting solutions to problems that benefit everyone, not just their community or their sort of, a solution that benefits them or their perspective. But like really interesting things that are sort of pushing the boundary, right, of what we've been told that we can or cannot do. I love that. They're also really willing to do the work, right? There's no pawning it off. There's no, oh, I don't know. There's no, well, can I hire someone to do that for me? They're like, what needs to be done? And if I don't know, how do I figure it out? And I think that sort of resiliency and that sort of mindset for me is just as important, right, as what maybe my numbers say, right? We must have both. In terms of, my own research, like when the founder shows up with a product, right, or a service, have I seen it before? What makes it special? Everyone's favorite question, can it scale? And what is the sort of the long-term vision of the founding team, and is it aligned with the potential of their idea? I think at the end of the day, right, like, much like, the way we work in much like a co-founder is we partner, right? I am making a commitment to this founder or this founding team. And if we're going to work together, I am going to ride with that team until they are successful. And so, I also check them. Do they want to work with me? Because, right, at the end of the day, they have to trust me. And if they don't, then that means it's not a great match, and that's cool. And I'm going to refer them to someone else that might be a better fit.
Love that. And yes, to the entrepreneurs on this call right now, definitely do diligence on the people you're trying to raise money on, just like they are doing to you.
Yes.
You mentioned your spreadsheets. So what are some of the financials that you look at, and what do you look at the closest, I guess?
Yeah. I mean, again, right, like around, well, I mean, it's different, right? So we have, I'm working with services, right, which is a little bit different, or we're looking at sort of like user-based models and sort of different pricing tiers. I'm working with an incredible team of women that are doing an actual cradle-to-cradle consumer electronics device, right? And something like that has been really challenging during COVID. And I would say that they are probably the most incredible, resilient team of women. They have solved the same problem probably 20 times at this point. And every time they come back with something better, right? And they have sort of, our numbers and the way we've looked at that has been, okay, the questions of, is it domestic versus international play, right? If it is international, what does that mean, with trade and tariffs? What are our COGS, right? How are things changing during COVID with supply? And all of those questions, right, are really important because their idea could have been the best idea in the world, but if it's going to cost us $40 to make the thing, right, and we need to sell it for 100, we're not going anywhere, right? And so really thinking about like those types of problems are really sort of critical in that early process, especially when, again, basically everything is an unknown, right? You're just kind of doing your research and coming up with this best guess model.
Yeah, and a lot of it is guesstimations, and as it's been said, the only thing that's accurate about financial projections is that they're wrong.
They're wrong.
But
right.
it is good to do as much as you can as far as calculating the the value that you're bringing,
right?
And then going from there. Back to a little bit of what you talked about on your thesis. You've spoken to and mentioned being less attracted to investing in billion-dollar companies, aka unicorns, and more attracted to investing in zebras. So for those on this call who don't know what a zebra is, can you explain that and a little bit about the thinking behind it?
Yeah. So I fully believe that the future of business is one that accelerates profit and purpose in equal measure, and without sacrificing one for the other. And I think that is really the most interesting thing about the redesign of venture capital for a social entrepreneur or for a founder that is thinking about the way that their business shows up in the world differently than someone that wants to come in, get funded, be a unicorn, exit, and move on. I also fundamentally do not believe that we need more billion-dollar companies. I do not believe that a billion-dollar company, the way that the money flows, impacts the bottom line of the day-to-day person in America. And that is really important to me, right? Where does our money go, and how do the businesses we're building actually make better lives, right? For and not just better lives, but how are these companies built in reality? How are they built to last? How are they designed to deliver excellent products and services? Zebras, we think about how do we reach profitability in the near future, right? How do we create solvent businesses as soon as possible? And I think the most important piece for me, and I think maybe when we talk about financials, while it's really like you really can't put this in a financial sheet, I'm trying. This idea that how does the business we are creating, right? How can we make the money flow? How can we model the financials so that every single business that goes in the world creates more opportunity, more wealth, and more agency, right? Not just for the founder, but for their teams, for the communities and industries that they exist in, just by nature of their operation, right? At the end of the day, our communities should do better every single time someone from our community is able to build a business that is successful. And our models must reflect that.
Amazing. And we had a quick question come in from an entrepreneur that's near and dear to us here at the center. So, hey, Kiri, she says, what are some of the metrics you use to determine the success of zebra companies for your GP or LPs and GPs?
Yeah, so I think getting back to this idea, right, of how quickly can we reach sort of profitability, right? Like how quickly can we hit a point where our revenue does not require that we continue to raise massive rounds of funding to keep our operations going? And so a lot of times, right, that is a play on the financial spreadsheet. And a lot of the choices that we make are based on that. Like, you know, there are two very different paths, right? If you are going to take I'm going to raise a, pre-seed, seed, A, B, C, D, right? I'm going to keep going. Like if I'm going to be an Uber, that is one play, right? But if I know that within, 24 to 36 months, I want to have a model that is at least returning enough revenue that I am not having to constantly go back, right, and taking capital, this is a very different play. And that really impacts the way that we are working with numbers and the choices that we're making as we're building out sort of the model for that business.
And if you can run on revenue, you control your destiny in so many ways.
Yep.
So last year, I'm not going to use the word unprecedented because it's overused, but last year was challenging, to say the least, for the world and also especially for entrepreneurs. So you've spoken about how your personal purpose statement helps you on the tough days. So how could our community think about their purpose statements, and where should they start?
Yeah. I think this is a really interesting space for me and for Mother Superior right now, because this is something that we are working with, right? I think up until now, we think there are a lot of different definitions for purpose, right, out in the world. But I think when we really think about purpose tactically, right, how does purpose equal opportunity, more socioeconomic agency, more community power? Purpose is something that you don't just donate 1% to the planet and are purposeful. It's great. Like if you're doing that, like awesome. But it's something you do more than once. And we need to invest in purpose in the same way that we invest in every other area of our work. The same diligence that goes into our financials goes into our purpose. And so right now, I think a great place to start is thinking about aligning. How do I align intent and action? And so if we think about intent, we can think about, okay, why am I here? What am I doing? What is important to me, right? And then sort of transitioning, right, from that into, can I create a statement out of it, right? Can I create like a little statement that is my North Star? And in the same ways that VCs have a thesis, right? Our companies also have a thesis, right? Where, like, with everything else moving around me, right? How am I navigating? How am I navigating my choices? I think coming out of that sort of North Star is how to identify the actions, right? The very foundational actions, maybe the more, sort of universal actions that are specific, right? That map back to that North Star. So thinking about, these are things you can track and measure. One of my teachers created a really great resource to think about this very first piece. And so it's called the Responsible Brand Toolkit. It's put out by Very Nice and another company, I can't remember, but I highly recommend it as a way to start really thinking about the intent and challenging your own ideas around purpose to better understand your work through that intent. And so while, there are definitely like underneath sort of that umbrella, right? Like there is the day-to-day work and the way that you're designing your business model. But I think even starting there a lot of times is like a really big aha moment, right? Because it really does sort of help you go from this place of like, everything is possible and I want to do good from the world to this is why I'm here. And this is specifically how I uniquely can do it.
Yeah, I love that. Because understanding the change you want to make in the world is important on the tough days. And also, when there's millions of things that anyone can spend their time on. So knowing about that change, right? I think too often people talk about like how money doesn't motivate success, right? Like money, as you said, is a mechanism to fuel growth, but at the end of the day, if your purpose isn't there, it's tough. It's harder to succeed. Speaking of things that potentially will make our entrepreneurs' lives easier, a recent VC on one of our panels mentioned your network is your net worth. So how do you personally think about selecting mentors, vendors, teammates, advisors? Any advice for our founders there?
Yeah, I mean, I think this, for me, really understanding my network as my net worth was a big hurdle, because by nature I am fairly I'm kind of an ambivert, right? But I'm also a sprinter in that I will throw myself into everything that I'm doing, but then I need to step back and I need to hide for a minute, right? I can go really, really fast, but then I'm like, okay, now I'm going to rest. Like that's just how I operate. And within that, I was noticing that I was using almost that as a crutch for like why I was not networking as much. Like, oh, this is my rest time, right? But the reality is that this sort of building a network around your mentors, around your vendors, around your teammates is, again, right, kind of like your purpose, something that you are always on and you are always solving for. I think this question of vendors specifically, we might get into it a little bit later, but in my sense, every single person that is in my own network, right? So first of all, after I got over my own limiting factor, right, was that like, oh, I maybe don't have time to do this, or I can't do it. I then realized that every single person must be value aligned, right? Like you can't just have something that I need. We must share the same value, because I have learned that if that alignment isn't there, I am spending my time cultivating a relationship that is not aligned with my own North Star, right? Is not aligned with my purpose. And therefore, the valuable time or the bit of time I do have to really invest in that, right, is not returning for either of us. Therefore, it is no longer a valuable relationship. And so, the mentors in my network, I have met all organically, but we have stayed in each other's lives because it has ended up being mutually beneficial, in many ways. But also is that when we sit down to have a conversation, right, we are speaking the same language, right? The words I'm using, they're using. The intent that I'm communicating, they understand. And so I think about this idea of your net worth beyond just size, but really the quality. Who is in there? Do you trust them? Are you aligned, right? And it's everything that you're all doing sort of tracking against the same thing.
I think that's a super important point that not many highlight, right? They're just like, yeah, go find a bunch of great mentors, but it's important to think that the other person across the table from you shares some of the same values and some of the same purpose.
I think, yeah, and I think especially when we're brand new, right? We often think that we don't have a ton to offer because we're new. But every single founder that I work with has something very specific that I didn't know. And it is because they are an expert in their own life, right? And the perspective that they have into the problem they're solving with their business is an insight that I never had. And so in many ways, right, like as I serve as a mentor, I am also always a mentee. I often think that I learn far more from the people that I am technically mentoring than they do from me, right? And so it is always mutually beneficial. And whether you believe it or not, like there is value to be had.
I love that. And we'll get into a little bit about paying it forward from the other side in a moment. Mm-hmm. But you mentioned growing your network pretty organically. So how do you suggest some of the early stage founders that don't have large networks, how can they cultivate one? How can they uncover the golden nuggets of mentorship out there in the world?
You have to put yourself out there. You have to. You have to talk about what you're doing. You can't be afraid. When I first started, I cannot even tell you the amount of times that I was basically laughed at by people in the VC community. It was like, this is, oh, good, great. Like, so you're running a charity? No, I'm not, right? Like these are, and so I think, I think you have to be prepared, especially if you are sort of moving into if you are trying to build a network and you are focusing on an area that maybe feels pretty new, or especially if you are a social entrepreneur, or especially if you are a social entrepreneur, especially that sees the world in a way that maybe many people have not had the perspective of seeing in that way, right? Like you have to be shameless about the way that you stand up and you educate the world about why you are here and why it is important. And I will say, I am a big, if it hasn't been clear, I'm a big fan of organic partnering, right? I feel like someone will see you and they'll be like, yes, like that thing you just said, like you are the person I want to talk to. And so, if you can do that, if we collectively can do that, like that is how we find each other. And the more vocal I am, the more I realize, like I would say in 2017, like I thought that like there weren't very many of me. And now I know that there are a ton of me, so many, and like way smarter, like like doing way cooler things, right, that are way farther along in the process. And we are now part of each other's network. And it really was because we like picked our head up and we weren't afraid to like, take the good and the bad that came with that, verbalizing what we're out here doing.
That's awesome. And yeah, it is. I mean, even as I'm an extrovert, and it takes work to meet new people. It's not easy. It's so just so for the introverts out there, it's work for everybody. It's not just doesn't come easy to everyone. It does take time and work and effort. And you mentioned a little bit about this, and I think it's important to highlight because mentorship and paying it forward is one of the core tenets at the center. And I think it's a big thing that a lot of people in Silicon Valley do, but maybe some of our attendees out there who don't have large networks are not familiar with it so much. So how can a founder become a value-aligned mentor for others and continue to pay forward their gems of knowledge?
This is my favorite question, because this idea of building a business with purpose is something in itself that most founders now want. I think the stat is that 88% of people under the age of 45 believe that the purpose of business is to improve the world in some way. And with all that being said, very few people know how to do it and know how to really think about it, plan it, execute it, measure it, right? Communicate it. And in this way, if you are one of these people and you really spend the time to discover and articulate and implement your purpose, just the way that you think about the world in itself is an incredible asset, right? It's like one of those things where if you've ever had a moment in life where like you know something, and then once you know it, you cannot unknow it. And all of a sudden, everything you see in the world is seen through the lens of this knowing, right? I do not care if you just have an idea and you haven't taken one step toward fundraising, or if you haven't even incorporated your business yet. If you are that person, like you already become a value aligned mentor, right? Because you can help change the way that someone is thinking about what they're doing in the world. I also think that this particular category of new founders that sort of fall into the social purpose founder bucket are the most powerful force in business right now, because you don't have to undo anything. You don't have to convince someone, right, that there's a new and better way. You just get to do it, right? And you get to do it from day one, and you get to do it with like all of the enthusiasm and like with exactly the way that you want to see in the world. And I just think that is like the coolest thing.
Same. Yeah, I mean, the question, why you, why now, often comes up across the VC table, right? And there's a lot of unique abilities and learnings that people have had throughout their entire journey that is the reason that problem is rolling around in their head like marbles that won't shut up, right? So super, super helpful. And so speaking of that, on the other side of the table, how can our founders find investors that are value aligned? And why is that so important?
It is so important. So,
and potentially maybe a different way of asking that. How can they identify whether or not an investor is value aligned, right?
Yeah. So I think we touched on this a little bit earlier, in that in the same way that you feel that everything that you are bringing to the table is being critiqued, you really have to be asking the same tough questions, and you have to be doing your homework. Many times when we get started, as mentioned before, especially if we're in a position where raising money, if we know that, right, that we are part of the stat that gets an infinitesimal % of funding, we are just like, yes, someone's going to give me money, right? But now more than ever, because there is more money, because there is so much awareness, right? Because, VCs themselves are under a microscope, right? To see these statistics growing in the favor of equity, right? What is this VC's thesis? Like really, like what is it, right? Like not just like what they wrote down, but like do some homework, right? Is it a match? Who else have they invested in? what other industries, and what other founders. I have explored the backgrounds of all of the founders that all of the VCs that I want to be funded by have invested in. Who are these? Who are they as people, right? Because now that is part of their network and their net worth, right? These are the people that will now become, or potentially may become, my peers. Who is their own advisor network, right? What do their bios say? How are they quoted in coverage? Many of these VCs have been covered in Forbes and Fast Company and Inc. Right? And what are their quotes? What do they have to say about the state of funding and what they expect and why they're there? I think something else, and this is sometimes a little bit harder, but what are they doing with their return? Because at the end of the day, the people that are funding you are building more wealth through your work and success. And I really want to know, are they going to reinvest the product of my work into something that is value aligned with what I believe in? And I think we've seen a lot of examples, whether it be, I think it was recently Toyota, whether it was Equinox, where that information has been uncovered and the homework hadn't been done, and it was not a very complimentary outcome, right? Who do I want to see benefit as a result of my own success? And then I think finally, like I'm gonna always call it, like, please do a vibe check. Like at the end of the day, even you can go through you can make your pros and cons, you can go through all of your checklists, if this is a good fit for you, right? And if it is not, if everything in you is screaming that like this is not the match, like really pay attention to that.
Sound advice. One stage earlier in the journey, many entrepreneurs ask us about, right? How do you reach out? How do you connect with VCs? How do you even identify them? So what's some advice there on how to effectively reach out, connect, be heard?
Yeah. I'm shameless now. I used to not be. Now I ask everybody, right? Do you know someone? I'm raising for this. Do you know someone? I wrote like a little paragraph, right? Here's, because I think I had mentioned earlier, right? Mother Superior is currently raising now for sort of the next phase of our work, which is actually not a fund, it is for a product. And I wrote a little bit of paragraph about what this is, and I sent it to everyone in my network with a call to action. If you know someone that is even like remotely might be interested, or know someone that might be interested, please send this. And so I think there's really that point of like just, networking shamelessly. You need to be comfortable talking about money. It's not something that many of us are innately really comfortable talking about. Know your numbers, ask the questions, stand up for what you believe in. I had someone say, well, don't you think that that's a little bit high for a C round? No, it is not. And here's why, right? Like really know what's up. The other thing is look in unconventional places, right? Like look at LinkedIn. I haven't personally done it, but I've heard of people getting funded through Clubhouse. I'm really tempted, I haven't done it yet, to just make a video, right, of myself, 45 seconds. Here's who I am. Here's what I'm fundraising for. Here's why it's important. Like, let's talk. Figure out ways to sort of capture people's attention, because we are inundated with information all the time. It is very, very hard to get someone's share of attention. And so think about if I have done my homework and I know specifically that this person is like the right person for me, I'm going to tailor that story. I'm going to send them something special. I'm going to figure out how to make myself stand out.
Yeah. Cold emails are tough, and everyone on this call knows our inboxes are slammed with things that we sign up for and don't sign up for every day. So
every day.
Do your homework. It's great advice. What are some of the common mistakes you see with outreach, at least in your inbox?
Yeah. So not tailoring the pitch. Like totally off. Making it too long, right? Like it's almost like you have to be your own publicist. You have to be your own PR person. Like, what is interesting to this person and how do I tell it to them in 3 sentences or less? Sending the whole deck without context. Like, send me a summary. Make me so interested that I want to write you and be like, yeah, like I want to. What else do you have to tell me? Like, take me through the facts. And I think to what I said earlier, it's kind of like you're sending the movie trailer, right? Thinking about what this person has funded before, like what are they into, right? Check their Twitter. It's very easy to tell, right? Like where someone interest lies, and do you have points of commonality, right? Not that you're contacting them to to geek out on something unrelated, but it does give you context for who they are as a person and kind of what their personality might be. But yeah, right story, right VC. And if you are going to find an unconventional way to connect, like do it authentically.
I love that. Yeah. And the point on making it short and succinct is I get, people send me really, really long emails. I also send my own really long emails, but those tend to not get read.
Yeah. Well, and it gets back to that point, right? Of like, we're competing for, attention, on, we have what, 15 seconds, I think is the statistic, maybe even less now.
Yeah, that's great advice. I know I want to get into Q&A, so we'll do that in just a moment. So we'll try to get to all those questions. But one last question for you, Joe. With the world opening up in some ways, what do you see on the horizon for early stage entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I think as we were talking about earlier, new businesses at an all-time high, right? We have this phenomena that we're calling the Great Resignation, which is, sort of with unprecedented numbers, people are leaving their jobs. And the number one reason that they're doing so is because they want to find work that is aligned with their life and is meaningful to them. And there is a direct correlation between this and the number of new business filings that we've seen. In 2020, we saw a 25% jump. It was historic from 2019 to 2020. And in 2021, we've already exceeded that ratio. And so, right? And so what I think that we're going to see, and I think what we're already beginning to see, is this groundswell of brilliant new founders and businesses that are going to start popping up in the next 12 months. I think that, for early stage entrepreneurs, like having a business model that is socially responsible is a competitive advantage, whether you're a nonprofit or a for-profit. Paying attention to both impact and revenue is key, right, in creating a business strategy that can both support you and fulfill you. And so, I think as the world is opening up, as founders are sort of getting out from behind their Zoom screens, as we feel a little bit more free to move about the world, I think it's really important to know that like the time is now. And if you are one of these founders and this is how you see the world and this is what you want to create, there is no better time for you. And like, please take advantage of that because we need you. We need all of you.
I love that. And also, 2020 was challenging, but I think it brought to the surface a lot of people's purpose, right? I think a part of the reason that so many businesses are starting these days is because people are like, what am I, I want to do something that's meaningful.
Right.
And to your point on the social and environmental good that companies are doing these days, look at the public markets, right? A lot of people are placing ESG at the top of the key as far as whether or not companies are going to do well. So if you can do it at the early stages, you don't have to be reactive, founders.
That's right. Start on day one.
Start on day one. Awesome. Well, we'll get a bunch of amazing questions, so I'm going to try to roll through them quickly. Joe, first of all, your insights have been amazing today, so hopefully we can get a couple more of them. So what are your thoughts on getting really specific with the problem you want to solve and how you want to solve it? And I'm guessing they're referring to with an investor. When you learn there are many ways you can do it, what helps you narrow it down so you can basically make a succinct story?
Right. I think that the idea that you have multiple paths to success is part of your story, right? I think that in itself is, especially if you're in the very early stages, that's a benefit, right? But I think what you have to do is, and this is part of what we talked about earlier, which is like sort of like using everything you have, really understanding what is my fastest path to revenue, right? And maybe I start there and being able to explain like, look, here's the thing, right? Here's how my business model looks. And I've kind of broken it up in phases, right? I'm pretty sure that based on these factors, this path is going to get me here the fastest. This is my fastest path to MVP, right? This is my fastest path, right? To getting, to onboarding, 100 users. And this is how I'm going to do it. But here are some other things I know based on the market, based on my research, based on, previous places I've worked. And here are other ways, right? That I can then add these other things on as features or services, or, here's a problem that I don't anticipate it, but that might pop up with this. And if it does, here's how I'm prepared to solve it. If you are in the very early stages, like we talked about earlier, the only thing that is certain is that 12 months from now, it's going to look different. And so it's really important for someone to know, like, I don't care if you have all the answers. And I mean, I'm talking from the perspective of someone that is currently pitching for something that I don't have all the answers for, right? But I will tell you that I am thinking through every possible avenue, thinking through the pros and cons of that. And I am prepared to pick one story that I feel like is my winning story, right? Because that is the story that is going to get me, to market, to revenue as fast as possible. And defend that and be prepared with like how the other pieces fit in.
Yeah, and it might not be too much of a close comparison, but it's kind of like stand up, right? Like you just kind of figure out what works and what doesn't work. I wouldn't test the early stories on people that the conversations are really important, right? But I think there's a lot of ways that you can refine and distill it just based on practice. I think a lot of it just you can figure out where people start leaning in too.
It's a really good point, right? Don't do your high stakes pitches first. Pitch on softballs, pitch on people that are going to be honest with you, but like kind to you, and not the person that's like, if I don't get this, I don't know what else I'm going to do, right? Like, yeah.
Yeah, we've heard VCs call those conversations the exhibition matches before the championship.
Yeah, I will tell you, the current deck I have, it is my 4th version. Like completely took it apart and completely rebuilt it 4 times because I did go through, right, those initial rounds and got that feedback. I was like, that is not the story I thought it was. Like, that was not what I was trying to say.
We got a great question here around the values vetting process, I get you to say. So what are some litmus tests in conversation to uncover the values, whether that's a VC partner, a new employee? What are some of your litmus tests?
I think maybe the first step is being really clear with yours. And I imagine that, I think there's a lot of different definitions of value, like we said. But if you are going to have these conversations and if you are going to think about litmus tests, what are you measuring it against, right? And does that person understand innately who you are and what you stand for? And then I think after that, right, I think like any good relationship, right, it is a conversation. And I don't know that it's so much about a Q&A as it is about like, I want to talk about this particular thing. And I've often found that like when you get really deep into it, like you really see who someone is, right? Because anyone can give you like the bullet points of purpose.
Yeah.
But when you really are kind of exploring like how you would handle a situation or the value call that someone would make in a situation, all of that stuff you can't find by doing the things we talked about earlier, right? By looking at who else they're investing in, right? By looking at their thesis. It's really like that judgment call. And I think that really comes out of building that relationship.
Totally. And speaking of those values, right, you're recommending put it into the foundation, and I do too. But is there someone's asking, is there a resource or two you can recommend for socially responsible business models? That's a very general question, but
so I'm going to say like, the answer is not in the way that I want to see it. But in full transparency, like that is what we're building. I think for me, the biggest challenge that I have understood in my last 3 years of work is that before I could raise another round for the Foundry, or before I can really support founders in the way I want to, there is this particular foundational component that I need to deliver, not just for my founders, but really at scale for all founders. And I think, it's something that I haven't seen solved in a way that grows with the founder beyond sort of this very sort of superficial, initial question asking. I will say though, I think the Responsible Brand Toolkit is a great place to start. And I know we're running out of time. And so whoever asked that question, if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, I have some very tactical things that you can do to start thinking about, like a little checklist. And I'm happy to share that with you, or, talk through that with you if you're interested.
Awesome. All right, I really like this one, and then we'll get to your final takeaway. But what are some of the best and worst cold email subject lines you've received?
Oh my gosh. Best and worst. I think like the worst is just like, I'm fundraising. okay. Maybe the best. Oh gosh. I need to think about that. I don't have it off the top of my head, but I will say that like typically if it reads like a news article headline or like a BuzzFeed headline, someone's going to click on it. Like, I hate to say that, right? Because it's taking a very complex process and like distilling it to like a BuzzFeed quiz. But at the end of the day, right, there is some magic in the way that those headlines appear. And there's a reason why we click on them. Like there's a psychology there. And so I think like you really have to think about like what is that call to action, right? And I think maybe, at least for me, like I look at some of those things that I'm compelled to click on and I try to mimic my own tone to match.
I think that's good advice. And I've had ones that like were so unique, I could not open them, right? I was like, this is either the best bot in the entire world or this person's creative, right? Like,
yeah.
So, be creative too, right? Like you mentioned, Joe, the worst ones are I'm fundraising or invest in me.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't give me anything, right? So, yeah, that's super great. Well, we couldn't get to all of the questions, but I hope that, if anybody has any follow-up, that they can connect with you on LinkedIn and follow up with some of those resources that you mentioned. And Joe, just what's one takeaway that you want our attendees today to come away with and go forth and conquer?
Every decision that you make as a new founder, and I don't care if you own a juice shop or if you want to, launch a unicorn, you have the power to design value alignment into every decision that you make, right? And you now have the opportunity to create a precedent that we have not yet seen done at scale. There is no one size fits all template, and each of you think about purpose in a different way. But I hope that today we've at least set the stage for some ideas and kind of been able to maybe shift your mental model to way to think about how your purpose actually leads to that outcome, right? How your success generates more opportunity, more success, more socioeconomic agency for your community and for the communities that you want to impact.
That's great advice. So, Joe, it's been a pleasure to speak to you today, and thank you so much for
having me.
Some of your insights and your treasure of time today to the people on this call. And for those of you on this call, hopefully this was helpful. We have a survey.
Thank you for joining.
Yep. We have a survey that we'd love to hear your feedback on. So if you could fill that up, there's a link in the chat. Joe, just really appreciate your time. And for everyone online, we look forward to seeing you at some of our upcoming events and webinars that are hoping to uncover and help you overcome your challenges. So on behalf of everybody on our team here, thank you again, Joe. And thanks for everyone for joining. We look forward to seeing you online very soon.